My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 30 years old. And last week, when my wife and I announced we were expecting our first child, my entire family laughed in our faces. I can still see the way Sophia's hand trembled as she placed the ultrasound photo on the table. How her smile flickered when my mother sighed. Oh, another baby. And how my father's chuckle turned the air cold. My sister Olivia smirked, lifting her glass like it was a toast, and said, "Guess he just knocked her up for the gifts." Everyone laughed. Sophia's face drained of color. I felt my chest tighten. The kind of hurt you don't recover from in a night. But what they didn't know was that I had been keeping receipts, literal receipts, for years. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. Because what I'm about to share isn't just a story about favoritism. It's about years of silence finally breaking. About secrets buried under family first exploding into the open. And trust me, you'll want to hear how it ends. I grew up in a house where silence carried more weight than words. The Miller home looked picture perfect from the outside: white siding, green shutters, a lawn trimmed sharp as a haircut. Neighbors thought we were the kind of family that had Sunday dinners and Christmas stockings lined up neatly by the fireplace. And in a way, they weren't wrong. We had the dinners. We had the stockings. What they didn't see was who got what, and who got left with scraps. I can still picture that long oak dining table in the center of our home, polished so much you could see your reflection in it. When I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9, dinners were where the favoritism first became obvious. Olivia always sat to my father's right, her plate piled high with roast chicken and buttery rolls, while mine was stacked with vegetables. I once reached for an extra drumstick, and my mom's hand shot out like lightning, pressing mine down. "Leave it for your sister," she said sweetly. But the sweetness was just a coating over steel. "You're strong, Ethan. You don't need as much." Olivia smirked, tore into the drumstick, grease shining on her lips. I chewed my steamed broccoli, nodding, telling myself it didn't matter. It did matter. It carved something into me. Small at first, like a nick in wood, but deeper each time it happened. School wasn't much better. In middle school, I worked on a science fair project for weeks, building a homemade water filter with layers of gravel, sand, and charcoal. I came in second place. My first ribbon that wasn't participation. I carried it home, chest puffed with pride. My father gave me a curt nod. Good. That same spring, Olivia got picked as junior cheer captain. They threw her a pizza party at home, balloons taped to the walls, music blasting while cousins came over to cheer. My ribbon stayed thumbtacked to my bedroom corkboard. No mention at dinner. I didn't know it then, but it would come back to haunt me years later, when my parents pretended I'd never accomplished anything at all. By high school, the pattern was written in stone. Senior year, I entered the debate team championships. Hours spent practicing, memorizing rebuttals, shaping arguments. I won the county title, holding a small gold trophy in my hands that felt like proof I wasn't invisible. I looked up in the auditorium, scanning the crowd for my parents, wanting that moment where our eyes met, where they'd smile and clap. The seats were empty. They'd left halfway through to drive Olivia to soccer practice across town. Later, when I brought the trophy home, my mom barely glanced at it. "That's nice, Ethan. But you know, soccer could get her a scholarship. Don't be selfish." I swallowed it, but it carved deeper than I thought. When I was 19, my father lost his job for a while. The house mortgage fell behind. He didn't tell anyone, but I overheard one night the muffled argument between him and Mom in the kitchen while I was supposed to be asleep. Words like foreclosure, eviction, shame. I had just started working part-time at a warehouse, and I had saved a little, barely enough for gas and textbooks. But I went to the bank anyway, pulled out everything, and handed it to him. $8,000. My life savings at the time. He took it with a gruff, "You did the right thing, son," and never mentioned it again. Olivia got a brand new iPhone that Christmas. I didn't get so much as a thank you card. I didn't know it back then. But keeping records in my head would matter later, when I needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that I really had carried more than my share. College should have been my escape. But even there, the comparisons followed me like a shadow. I commuted to the local state school, worked shifts at the IT help desk, and stretched every dollar of my scholarship. Olivia, 2 years behind me, announced she wanted to study abroad in Italy. My parents panicked. They didn't have the credit to co-sign the loan she needed. I still remember the night they came to me. Mom sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped like she was praying, eyes big with faux desperation. "Ethan, you're the responsible one. You've always looked out for family. If you co-sign, it'll be quick. She'll pay it back." I signed the papers. Olivia sent postcards from Florence, pictures of pasta, sunsets, and wine. She came back with souvenirs for everyone but me. And when the loan bills started arriving years later, guess whose credit took the hit? Mine. That was when the bitterness began to settle in, like smoke creeping under a door. I didn't say anything, I never did, but something inside me started keeping score. Line by line, debt by debt. Holidays were the worst. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, it didn't matter. The Miller house was a stage, and my parents were directors. Olivia was always front and center, the star of the show. She got the expensive gifts, the spotlight to share her stories about her job, her marriage, her travels. I got socks, maybe a tie. One Christmas, I gave them a framed picture of me and Sophia, newly engaged at the time. Mom smiled thinly, set it aside. Minutes later, Dad wheeled in a new flat-screen TV for Olivia and Kyle. For the baby they'll have someday. Sophia squeezed my hand under the table. I smiled. But inside, something cracked. I didn't know it then, but all those little cracks were leading me to the moment when the dam would finally break. One memory still sticks sharper than the rest. 2 winters ago, snow piled thick against the windows. The family had gathered for Christmas dinner. Olivia announced she was pregnant, and the room erupted. Cheers, hugs, champagne popping. I raised my glass, happy for her despite everything. Then Kyle, her husband, clapped me on the back and said, "Better catch up. Man, don't let us lap you." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, the sound hollow in my throat. That night, Sophia cried quietly in the guest room because we'd been trying for months with no success. I held her, whispering that it didn't matter, that our time would come. I didn't know it then, but when it finally did come, when we finally had our miracle, my family would find a way to turn it into another wound. The memory that came back the strongest was from Christmas Eve 3 years ago. Snowflakes were drifting down outside the living room window, catching in the yellow glow of the streetlight. Sophia and I had driven 4 hours through icy roads to make it in time. I carried the bags of presents we had carefully picked out for everyone: scarves for Dad, a framed family photo for Mom, a set of headphones for Olivia, even something small for Kyle. We'd spent weeks budgeting, cutting corners on our own groceries to afford gifts that felt thoughtful. But when we stepped inside, the first thing I saw was the mountain of packages under the tree, all wrapped in gold foil paper, stacked so high they nearly covered the bottom branches. Each one had Olivia's name written in elegant cursive. When it came time to open presents, my parents cooed and clapped at every sweater, every necklace, every gadget Olivia pulled from the shiny piles. When Olivia finally handed me a gift, it was a mug with "World's Okayest Brother" printed across it. Everyone laughed. "It's a joke," she said, her dimples flashing as she leaned into Kyle's shoulder. My mother laughed the loudest, wiping tears from her eyes. I forced a smile. sipping from that mug for months afterward until the words faded from the ceramic. I didn't know it then, but that chipped mug would symbolize everything unspoken between us. I was the backup character in their carefully curated family picture. Never the star. Another memory surfaced. This one from the summer of 2020. The pandemic had left my father unemployed for months. Mortgage payments were overdue. The phone calls from the bank became relentless. Mom called me late one night, her voice thick with manufactured tremors. "Ethan." "Honey," she said. "We're drowning. Your father is so stressed he can barely sleep. We might lose the house if we don't make the payment by next week." I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the numbers on my laptop screen. Sophia was asleep in the other room. The only money I had saved was the emergency fund we'd scraped together. Maybe enough to cover 3 months of rent. I hesitated, then transferred $8,000 into my parents' account. Mom's reply came within minutes. "Thank you, sweetheart. You saved us." That was the last time it was mentioned. A week later, when I stopped by to drop off groceries, my father said nothing. My mother had moved on to talking about Olivia's new job promotion. I told myself I didn't need gratitude. I told myself it was enough to know I'd kept them afloat. But it carved deeper than I realized. Sophia remembers another moment that sticks with her. We were at a family barbecue in the backyard one July. The air thick with the smell of charred burgers and citronella candles. She had just told Mom she'd gotten a new position at work, an achievement she'd been nervous about sharing because it meant longer hours. Mom smiled, then immediately pivoted to Olivia. "That's nice. Dear, did you hear Olivia and Kyle are planning a trip to Italy next spring? Isn't that exciting?" Sophia looked at me across the table. Her lips pressed tight, her hands folded in her lap. Later that night, she whispered, "It's like we don't exist to them." I didn't argue. The worst memory of all came during Olivia's wedding. The event was lavish, an outdoor ceremony under a white canopy. Champagne flowing before vows were even spoken. A live jazz band flown in from Chicago. Sophia and I couldn't afford much at the time, but we offered to help. When the wedding planner mentioned the deposit for the photographer was overdue, I quietly put it on my credit card. I never told anyone, not even Sophia at first. Weeks later, when the family gathered for dinner, my father made a toast to Olivia and Kyle. "We couldn't have done this without your mother's careful planning." I felt the words like a slap. My credit card bill tucked deep in my wallet. I didn't know it then, but someday that receipt would sit in the spreadsheet I built. Another line of proof that I'd been the invisible scaffolding propping up their picture-perfect world. There were smaller slights, too, each one adding another crack, like Thanksgiving, when Dad carved the turkey and gave the drumsticks to Olivia and Kyle, telling me, "You don't mind, do you? Son, you've always liked the quiet pieces." Or the time Olivia wrecked her car in college. She called me in tears, begging for help. I drove 5 hours, paid the towing fee, and even fixed part of the bumper myself. Later, Mom told relatives, "Thank God Kyle helped Olivia when she needed it." I never corrected her. Each memory was like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I swallowed it all, convincing myself it wasn't worth a fight. But there was one night that stands out as the silent turning point. It was late December, snow falling thick, the Miller house glowing with lights strung across the eaves. We were seated around the table, cinnamon candles flickering, mugs of mulled wine steaming. Olivia was telling a story about her latest work project, her voice animated, her hands gesturing wildly. When she finished, Dad leaned back, smirked, and said, "You'll never be half the star your sister is, Ethan. She's destined for great things." The words hung in the air like smoke. Everyone chuckled, even Mom, as if it were the punchline of a joke. I stared at the wood grain on the table until it blurred. Sophia's hand brushed mine under the table, grounding me. I smiled faintly, said nothing. But in that silence, something hardened in me. I didn't know it then, but that moment would matter later. It was the night I promised myself that if they ever pushed too far, I wouldn't swallow it again. I would make sure they saw me whether they wanted to or not. That was the picture of my past. 1,000 little slights, each one carved into my memory like initials in wood. They thought I'd forgotten. They thought I'd accepted my role as the quiet, reliable son who never made demands. But those memories weren't gone. They were fuel. And by the time Sophia and I found out we were expecting, that fuel had built into something volatile, waiting only for the spark. The first crack after our pregnancy announcement came faster than I expected. We'd gathered in the Miller living room, the fire popping in the hearth, the smell of pine needles from the tree cutting through the air. Sophia rested her hand on her belly, a shy smile lighting her face as we told them the news. For a heartbeat, the room went still. Then Olivia burst out laughing. "You parents, God help that kid." Kyle chuckled beside her, shaking his head like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Mom clapped her hands once, forcing a smile. "That's nice, dear. But this isn't really the time, is it? We have so much stress with Olivia's shower coming up." One thing at a time. I felt Sophia's fingers tense in mine. The joy drained from her eyes in seconds. My father cleared his throat, already pivoting the conversation back to Olivia's registry and the problem with the venue. That was the first wound. Our child, our future, dismissed like a nuisance. Days later, the phone calls began. At first it was Mom, her voice sweet, dripping with guilt. "The bank made a mistake," she said. "The account for Olivia's shower is empty. They're threatening to cancel the whole event. You're the only one we can count on. Ethan, you know how important this is for the family's reputation." I asked her how much they needed. When she said the number $12,000, I nearly dropped the phone. "Absolutely not," I said. My voice was calm, but inside, my chest was pounding. She sighed, as if I'd disappointed her in the most predictable way. "You've always been the strong one. You can handle it. Olivia can't. Do you really want her humiliated in front of everyone?" I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. It didn't end there. Texts from Olivia followed. Screenshots of dresses, venues, florists, captioned with lines like, "Guess none of this matters since my brother's too selfish to help." Then Kyle chimed in. "If the shower falls apart, it's on you. Man, family first, right?" I read those words while sitting in the break room at work, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to the air. My fingers hovered over the phone, trembling with fury. For the first time in years, I typed back, "Take one more dollar from me, and I'll file a fraud report." Then I locked the screen, shoved the phone in my pocket, and walked back to my desk like nothing had happened. But inside, something sharp had clicked into place. The whispers started among relatives soon after. Aunt Marie left a voicemail, "I don't know what's gotten into you, Ethan, but refusing to help family, everyone's talking. It looks prideful, shameful." Grandma Helen, her voice brittle with age, called to say, "Your mother tells me you've turned your back on them. I didn't raise you this way." I wanted to scream into the receiver, to tell them about the mortgage, the wedding deposit, the countless transfers that had kept this family afloat. Instead, I listened in silence, my jaw tight, my knuckles white. They had rewritten the story already, painting me as the ungrateful son, and no one questioned it. One evening, Sophia found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by receipts and bank statements. A spreadsheet glowed on my laptop, line after line of dates, amounts, and notes. She touched my shoulder. "You're building your case," she said quietly. I nodded, eyes burning. "If they want to drag me through the mud, fine. But I won't let them erase what I've done." I didn't know it then, but that spreadsheet would become my weapon. The pressure only grew. At work, I stayed late to cover projects, but my phone buzzed endlessly. Olivia posting Instagram stories about her ruined shower. Tears carefully staged. Followers chiming in with sympathy. Mom leaving voicemails about how I was tearing the family apart. Dad threatening to cut me out of the will, as though inheritance was supposed to buy my silence. Every ping of my phone was another blade twisting deeper. But the moment that nearly broke me came on a Sunday afternoon. Sophia and I had just set up the first piece of nursery furniture, a crib we bought secondhand. I was tightening the last bolt when Dad walked in without knocking. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes full of cold judgment. "You think you're making some kind of stand," he said, "but all you're doing is proving you'll never measure up. Olivia is the star. Always has been. Always will be." Sophia gasped softly. But I didn't move. I just stared at him. Screwdriver clutched in my hand. My knuckles white. When he finally turned and left, the silence in the room was suffocating. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. But inside, the decision was already forming. If they wanted a war, I would give them one. That was only the beginning. And I had no idea how much lower they'd sink before the truth finally came to light. The days blurred together after that Sunday. Snow piled up on the edges of the driveway. A hard white crust under gray skies. But inside our house, the tension only grew heavier. Every morning I woke to another dozen messages. Another wave of blame. It wasn't just Mom and Dad anymore. Cousins, uncles, even people I barely spoke to joined in. "Just pay it. Ethan, stop being difficult. You know Olivia deserves this. Why are you making Sophia suffer for your pride?" I stared at those words at 2 in the morning, the glow of the phone burning my eyes. Sophia stirred beside me, whispering, "Turn it off, please." But I couldn't. I couldn't look away from the avalanche of guilt pressing down on me. Then came the Facebook post. Olivia. Hair perfect. Face streaked with what looked like tears. She typed, "Some people would rather ruin everything than support their family. I never thought my own brother would betray me like this." Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments. Cousins telling her to stay strong. Friends sending heart emojis. Not one person asked about me. Not one. I sat there, scrolling through the flood of sympathy, my chest hollow. And then I did something I'd never dared before. I opened my spreadsheet, took a screenshot. Every dollar I'd lent or paid. $8,000 for the mortgage. Cosign for Olivia's semester in Florence. $4,000 for Mom's car repairs. And dozens more. Caption, "Funny how I was family when you needed me. Now I'm selfish for saying no." I posted it, closed the laptop, and waited. The explosion was instant. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years DM'd me, saying they had no idea. One uncle commented publicly, "I can confirm this is true. Ethan's helped more than any of us." Olivia deleted her post within the hour, but the crack in her golden image was already spreading. That night, Dad called. His voice was ice. "You think you're smart? Humiliating us like this. You've made a fool of your family. If you keep this up, don't expect to see a dime in the will." For a moment, my throat tightened. The boy I used to be, the one who wanted approval, nearly begged him to stop. But then I thought of Sophia crying herself to sleep after our announcement. I thought of our unborn child, already dismissed as an afterthought. "I don't want your money," I said coldly. "I want respect. Since that seems impossible, I'll settle for the truth." And I hung up. The next blow came from Mom. She left an envelope at our door, her handwriting looping across the front. Inside was a photocopy of their will, next to my name. In Dad's sharp script, "This can change." Sophia read it over my shoulder, her face pale. "They're threatening you," she whispered. I laughed. A bitter, humorless sound. "They think this is my price. That if they dangle inheritance, I'll fall back in line. I folded it once, shoved it in a drawer, and said quietly, they just gave me more leverage than they realize. But the worst wound came not from my parents, not even from Olivia. It came from Kyle. One evening, Sophia and I drove by my parents' house, just to clear our heads. As we passed the garage, the door was open. Inside, gleaming under the fluorescent light, was a brand new ATV. Kyle stood beside it, beer in hand, laughing with a buddy. Sophia sucked in a sharp breath. That's where the money went. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened. Everything snapped into place: the bank error, the frantic calls, the manipulation. They weren't desperate because of me. They were desperate because Kyle had drained the account, and they'd rather let me take the blame than admit their perfect son-in-law was a fraud. The humiliation burned hotter than any rage. I could taste it, bitter as metal. That night, lying awake in the dark, I realized the truth. This wasn't just favoritism. It was a pattern. Protect Olivia at all costs, cover up Kyle's mistakes, and use me as the scapegoat, the disposable son, whenever the cracks showed. But not anymore. I turned to Sophia, whispering into the silence. They think they've broken me, but they've only handed me the one weapon I need. Her hand found mine under the blanket. Then use it, she murmured. But do it smart. I closed my eyes, the plan already forming. If they wanted war, I would fight, not with shouting or threats, but with evidence. Cold, undeniable truth. And for the first time in my life, I felt calm. Because soon, they were going to see who I really was. The night before the shower, snow fell hard, muffling the streets. Inside our house, the silence was sharp. Sophia brewed tea, the kettle hissing like a warning. I sat at my desk, files open, screenshots, spreadsheets, messages, evidence stacked like weapons. At 9 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A single text from Dad: family meeting. Tomorrow. Our house. Be there. I stared at it until the words blurred. Family meeting. It sounded less like reconciliation and more like trial. A trial where I was already the defendant. Sophia leaned on the doorframe. You don't have to go. I do, I said, my voice low. But I'm not walking in unarmed this time. The next afternoon, the driveway was jammed: Mom's sedan, Olivia's SUV, Kyle's truck, even Grandma's old Buick. The house loomed, its holiday lights blinking cheerfully, mocking the darkness inside. We stepped into the living room, heat from the fireplace clashing with the chill in my chest. Everyone was there. Dad by the mantel, arms crossed. Mom perched on the couch, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Olivia sat beside her, red-eyed but defiant, her hand clasped in Kyle's. Grandma Helen stiff in her armchair. The air was thick, suffocating. Thanks for coming, Dad said curtly. Let's settle this. I stayed standing. Settle what? Mom's voice trembled. You humiliated your sister. You humiliated us. Posting about money online. How could you? My laugh was sharp. Private money? You mean the money I gave you for years? The money you pretended never happened? Olivia snapped. You didn't have to make it public. Do you know how embarrassing that was? Embarrassing. My voice cut through the room. You mocked my wife when we shared our pregnancy. You dismissed our child. And then you tried to make me the villain for refusing to pay for your party. You embarrassed yourself. Olivia. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Dad exhaled sharply. This isn't about the past. It's about now. Tomorrow is important for the family. Can't you put aside your grudges for one day? One day, I repeated, my tone rising. One day where I smile through your insults. One day where Sophia and I stand in the corner while everyone worships Olivia. One day where I let you use me. Again. just to keep your image spotless. The silence after those words was suffocating. Sophia stepped forward then, voice calm but steady. When we told you we were pregnant, Olivia joked Ethan only got me pregnant for gifts. I cried myself to sleep that night. Did any of you care? No one answered. Grandma finally spoke, her voice sharp. Family isn't perfect. Ethan, you can't just walk away over hurt feelings. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. My voice was colder than ice. This isn't about feelings. It's about facts. I opened the spreadsheet, held it up. Here's every dollar I've given you. Mortgage payments, car repairs, Olivia's study abroad. Thousands. Quietly, without thanks. Gasps filled the room. Grandma leaned forward, squinting. Is this true? Dad's jaw tightened. It's true. The room cracked open. But I wasn't done. Want to know why the venue canceled? I asked. It wasn't a bank error. It wasn't my refusal. It was this. I swiped to the screenshot from Tessa, the event coordinator. Kyle drained the account the day before, bought himself a toy, and then, with one more swipe, I showed the photo. Kyle, grinning, beer in hand, standing next to the brand new ATV in the garage. Olivia turned on him instantly. You didn't. I did. Kyle barked. Because I knew your brother wouldn't step up. Somebody had to do something. Her face twisted. Half rage, half betrayal. You ruined everything. Mom buried her face in her hands. Dad muttered curses. Grandma shook her head in disbelief. The room erupted, shouting, accusations. Olivia, sobbing. Kyle snapping back. Mom begging for calm. Through it all, I stood still, silent. Sophia's hand slipped into mine, grounding me. Finally, when the noise dulled, I spoke. My voice carried like a blade. Do you understand now? Do you see why I said no? This isn't about me being selfish. It's about you using me to hide your messes, while treating me like I don't matter. The words hung heavy in the smoky air, heavier than the fire, heavier than the shame etched into every face. Mom's lip trembled. Dad's shoulders sagged. Olivia buried her face in her hands. For the first time in my life, they weren't looking at me as the invisible son. They were looking at me as something else entirely. I felt the shift, like a knife pulled from a wound. And when I finally smiled, it was cold. Because this was only the beginning. The drive home felt strangely quiet. Snow still fell, dusting the streets in white. But inside our car, there was only silence, thick, heavy, and electric. Sophia's fingers laced through mine on the steering wheel. You were unstoppable back there, she whispered. I gave a short laugh. Bitter and cold. Unstoppable, maybe. But did you see their faces? They weren't sorry. Not really. They were scrambling. Scared, their perfect image cracked wide open. Sophia looked at me carefully. So, what now? I didn't answer right away. My mind kept replaying the evidence on my phone. The spreadsheet. Tessa's messages. Kyle's picture with the ATV. Tools. Weapons. Proof that every time they tried to twist the story, I could snap it back in half. At home, I set the phone on the kitchen table, screen glowing like a loaded gun. I stared at it, feeling something settle inside me, a cold clarity I'd never felt before. They think tonight was the end, I said slowly. But it's not. They think exposing Kyle is the final blow. It isn't. Sophia tilted her head. Then what? As I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the dark window where snowflakes swirled. Every lie. Every time they rewrote history to make me the villain or Olivia the saint. I've kept the receipts, bank records, texts, emails. I never realized how much I had until I put it all together. Sophia's voice dropped. Ethan, are you planning something? I looked at her. And for the first time that day, I smiled, not bitter, not pained, but sharp. They wanted to scare me with a will, with inheritance, with threats of being cut out. They thought that was leverage. But what they don't understand is I'm not the one trapped anymore. They are. Sophia's eyes widened. She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. She knew me well enough to recognize the shift. I closed the laptop, stood, and turned off the kitchen light. The house sank into darkness except for the faint glow of the nursery down the hall. I pressed my hand against the doorframe, feeling the quiet inside. They tried to humiliate us. I whispered. But what they didn't know was, they just handed me the one weapon I needed. And with that, I walked into the dark, already planning my next move. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, you know exactly how it burns. The silence, the favoritism, the manipulation. But remember this, sometimes the only way to survive is to stop playing their game and start telling your own story. My story isn't finished, and if you've ever been betrayed by family, you'll want to see how this ends. So hit subscribe, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Trust me, this is just the beginning.